I'm here with Lex of 3Teeth to talk about EndEx, the new record from the band that drops September 22nd on Century Media Records. First of all, thank you very much for taking the time to sit with me, to talk about the band, to talk about this album. How's things with you?
Things are great, man. Thanks for having me on the show. I always appreciate your sort of like thoughtful reactions and sort of the way you dissect music. So it's cool to be here.
I appreciate your appreciation, so that it's reciprocal. I love the fact that you're giving me that feedback. It means the world to me. When it comes to this record specifically, did you guys approach, I should say, this album individually, song by song, or do you, in the back of your mind, did you guys always had a vision for what you wanted the collective to be like?
It's a little bit of both. Primarily, it took months to kind of put together a document that sort of mapped out the journey that this album is supposed to be. I'm happy to share what that looks like to like. It's sort of interesting to show this type of thing after the fact to people. But yeah, I put together an entire document that essentially each song is connected, and it's like a roadmap that sort of gives us a bit of a North Star conceptually to start working off of. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have happy little mistakes or detours or things or a little song, sometimes the name of the song will change, but the concept will stay the same. Maybe the ordering might change a little bit. But ultimately it was completely mapped out before we started writing. From that point, then we really just focus on each of the songs, sort of like if each song was a room or a character in a movie or something like that, we give it all the love and all the total focus once we're sort of onto that song. So it's a bit of both.
Wow, it sounds extensive, and it sounds like it's a lot of work. Is it as much fun as it doesn't sound like it is?
It's both. I mean, it's fun, but it's definitely work. I think that the saving grace was we had so much time on this record. We never had this much time. A bit of a silver lining afforded by the pandemic. So we really got to sort of like go deeper into this type of thing than we normally would have. That can also be a blessing and a curse. Having too much time to work on something, you can sort of overkill it, or you can sort of overproduce stuff. So you end up also hearing something so many times that you lose sight of it sometimes. So you have to sort of distance yourself from something to go, okay, let's work on this other thing. We'll come back to that with fresh ears. But yeah, no, it was a lot of work.
You mentioned the words overproduction. I don't think there was any overproduction on this album. I'm a huge fan of the production of this record. How important is that aspect of making an album for the record to have the DNA sound of the band?
I mean, that's kind of everything. We approach everything from a production standpoint. A lot of talented people in the project and stuff like that. And, we're not necessarily doing anything that new. I'm not sure anything, like there's nothing really original left under the sun in terms of like musicality. So it's almost like the technology and the production allows us to sort of like take something that might have already existed and like give it like all these different layers and making sure everything has its own space and like working on the sort of subtleties of it. I think that's stuff that excites us, more so than just being like a bunch of guys in rooms playing instruments. It's definitely like some nerdy energy going on, especially with Mick Gordon. That guy's, the guy, he like puts on the lab coat in the studio type of thing. He's very much so a sonic scientist.
How much do you allow previous records to impact that vision board that you had for this new album?
It's tough to say, like our previous records or records in general.
No, your previous records. Like, do you look? Are you one of those guys that looks a lot to the past before you even start to look to the future, or what's in the past?
I think you have to. I think you have to be to a certain extent. I think it's important to sort of like take audit of what's been done, and sort of think about, all right, cool. Like we did this on this record, we did this on this record, and every record you learn about stuff. You learn from your mistakes on records as well. And I think that for us, especially for this album, because we had so much time and there was so much of this sort of like I guess like pre-analysis of stuff before we started writing. I think that this was a record that we really did look backwards before we started looking forwards, especially because of the timing of it. Like we had just put out a record in 2019 and the pandemic happened in 2020. We weren't necessarily ready to start writing a new record We just were sort of like forced into it. So instead of just like jumping in, being like, oh, we have all this new inspiration, it was like we kind of wanted to like, all right, let's figure out what we can write about. Metawar felt like it was conceptually playing out in real time in 2020. So it wasn't like, all right, cool, like let's write Metawar 2 again. It was like we wanted to write from a different perspective, but also keep in mind of everything that had been done. Do you want to see something kind of cool real quick? And I'll just show it. If you enable the screen sharing.
Listen, I chose the option for multiple participants can share simultaneously.
Oh, no, cool. Okay, now I can do it. All right. Well, you're gonna,
So
that'll be worth it because I'll sort of show you how this document worked. And this was done in, let me see. Can you see my screen?
yeah, I can see your screen.
And this was done in August of 2020. So like we had moved out to Joshua Tree in June of 2020. So took basically all the summer. We didn't really write anything for the entire summer. We basically just started playing with ideas and concepts and sort of like mapping out what this thing was going to look like. So this document was designed to start at the bottom, sort of under the earth, in this sort of like DNA inside the earth. And then it was supposed to work its way up as this sort of singular cohesive document that you can see here. And, you know, each of these had the concept. So it was like almost scoring to picture and having this sort of document for us to work off of.
Oh, one of my favorite songs, Alien.
Yeah, that I put together. And some of these songs changed names, but ultimately it was still the same map that we worked off from the beginning. So I think that that was something that, again, we didn't normally have the time to do this type of thing, because it was like, oh, we got to go back on tour, we got to do this. And, you know, so having all the time to really create a conceptual document, it helped us bring in collaborators and keep everyone on the same page. It sort of just gave us a visual language to work off of, and sort of, you know, people like Mick Gordon, who's used to scoring video games and highly conceptual things like steeped in lore, to give him stuff to work off of as well. So that was something that I really took charge in doing in the first few months of coming up with what to write about.
Wow, that is crazy, dude. And in the 6 years that I've been reviewing albums and doing interviews, I've never talked to anybody from any band that had like a PowerPoint. I mean, it's not a PowerPoint, it was a PDF, but
Yeah.
you get my point. A PowerPoint presentation of how they outline the making of a record. That is insane. I love it. I honestly, I love it. I think it's great. And I think once you learn about this, now listening to the record, the record will have a completely different texture to it. Now when I go back and I listen to the album, it's going to be like rediscovering the album all over again.
Yeah, man, thank you. I mean, for us, it helps. You know, there's a lot. There's not really a songwriting process that we have. It's kind of chaotic. So like in terms of like how the thing can sonically start sounding, whether it starts as like, dude, we got this cool synth line, or like, dude, I have a couple lyrics, or, oh, we've got this riff, or oh, this drum groove, whatever. It can start in any corner. And we don't really like to limit ourselves. So it could be chaotic if we didn't have some sort of visual roadmap to sort of like put it slightly on the rails. So that type of thing definitely helps for us, at least.
And this album had a really nice, thick, heavy guitar sound through and through. Was that one of the things you had on your vision board, that you wanted this album to have that guitar sound?
Just Chase. Chase is just a beast. He's just like, you know, as a guitar player, he's also as a really talented producer. So he's the type of guy that, you know, wrenches on his tone and makes sure that, you know, it sits in the mix in the right place and gives it the right space, and, you know, having different tones for every song. And that was another thing. It was like every song really was supposed to feel like its own scene, its own space, different mixes, different drum kits, different guitar sounds. Everything was not supposed to be like one of those albums that you just listen to and every song just sounds like, you know, 4 or 5 guys in a room on their instruments and the mix is across the board. For us, it was a style choice for us to sort of make sure that every song had its own identity, which can be a challenge because sometimes you start to like look back at a record and you go like, does this even make sense together? Like, how do these things all work together? And you have to sort of like definitely tip your hat to the people who mix the record, because that creates a big challenge for them to like figure out how to make everything feel coherent, but also having its own space and vibe. You know, also mastering. Each song almost needs its own master chain and stuff like that. So it's definitely a longer process of doing something like that, but a style choice nonetheless that it was important to us. I mean, we had loved records like that. Like I think like the Downward Spiral is a record that does that so fucking well, where you're like every song is so different, but it still feels so coherent, and you know the vibes are just impeccable on that record. You know,
Where would you rank this album from your standpoint as far as vocals are concerned in the difficulty barometer? Was this a more difficult album for you, an easier album for you?
100% more difficult. It was something that for me, like I've never really favored myself as a talented vocalist, and for me, I'm always learning record to record, and it's something that like I've been luckily doing long enough that like I'm vaguely proficient at. So I think that this was a record that we had a really talented vocal producer working on, Nick Rowe, and he pushed me in a lot of cool places and things that I wasn't even necessarily comfortable with. I'm not really a big melodic guy personally, but I think that
Did well though.
yeah, and I think in order to find some of the more like emotive aspects of the songwriting and the to show an evolution of what we were doing, because I don't think that like it's something that we've ever really done in the past. So it seemed like, okay, album 4, let's like try that a little bit more. And I think that, shit, we sat around writing songs by some campfires with acoustic guitars at times. That's not very industrial. But when you're out in the desert and a song like Drift, which is very different for us, it felt like the right thing to do. It felt authentic to our moment in time and how I felt and stuff like that. So I wasn't sure how people were going to react to that song, but it seemed like people like it, which is cool.
It's also one of my favorites, that one and Alien. And I got to ask you about Alien. How was that track for you? Was it a difficult song? Was it an easy song that just flew well into the overall flow of the record?
That song has like 9 different versions of it. Lyrically and vocally, it actually flowed pretty easily for me. It was just like I got to kind of just do some psycho stuff and be really aggressive. We wrote a melodic part that was originally supposed to be the chorus, but I hated it, the chorus. So we ended up like making that the pre-chorus, and then we just kind of did this like almost like tribal groove chorus that almost touched on like a slight bit of like Sepultura, like on like that, the sort of cadence and the rhythm of the actual chorus, which kind of sounds like a post-chorus. Maybe it's the chorus. I'm not really sure how it's structured, but the crazy thing about that song, there's not a single guitar on that.
Really?
That's all synth. So Chase basically figured out how to make that synth, and he worked on that patch, and it just sounds like the nastiest guitar tone ever.
Yeah, it soun's like
not a single guitar on it. Yeah.
Holy shit.
That's all Chase's brilliance. He's an extremely talented piano player as well, maybe a better piano player than even a guitarist, but he has that sort of like virtuoso piano player brain that sort of can be applied to sort of like a riff nonetheless. So yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting. Now when it came to the lyrical content, how important is that aspect? Because we obviously the sound is there, the production is there, this is a great sounding record all around. I said it on my review, I think this is the best album you guys have ever done. But when it comes to the lyrical content, what kind of importance do you place on that?
I mean, for me, that's like that's the soul of what I do. Like I always, whether or not I actually do have something to say, I feel like for me, I'm working through my own shit, and like, some of it is allegorical. So it's like, making these sort of like cryptic sort of allegories and storytelling, but it's really all its core like shit that I'm just working through in my own head, my own little diary. So for me, it's super important. I think every record I can look back on and listen to and like remember what I was going through or how I felt at a time. So, as the lyricist, I get to express myself, and I think that that's an important thing for me. Some people listen to lyrics, some people don't, but for me, I think as an artist or whatever, I think that that's super important.
Do you write when you're writing lyrics? You write with the album in mind, with the songs in mind, or do you always scribbling things around?
I write with a concept in mind. Sometimes I'll have something. It's like a little idea in the back of my head, and then like that can serve as a inception point for kind of creating the song idea. But a lot of times it's a song idea and then trying to like write around that.
Do you see the evolution of the band completely tied into your own personal evolution as an artist?
That's an interesting question. I think that in many ways, I always kind of looked at 3Teeth as an art project attached to the chassis of a band. Like that was the vehicle that pushes it around and the things that sort of power it. But and for me, being able to sort of express how I felt through that, I always felt like, okay, cool, this is like an art project for me. But obviously everyone has their own inspirations and ideas and inputs and stuff like that. So, I don't think you can really separate it, maybe I get to be in the driver's seat more than most, but ultimately we all kind of end up deciding the final path and directionality together,
One of the great experiences about listening to this record is I felt like I took this pill that allowed me to shrink to a size, like really small size, that allowed me to travel into your brain. And each song was me going through a part of your brain and kind of seeing what you see, but from the inside versus from the outside. I think that art project on this record completely got an A+.
That's awesome, man. Thank you. I was thinking back to, what was that movie, Inner Space, where they shrunk down and they went inside people.
I think if a
movie,
record can do that for a listener, I think that's the ultimate. For me as a listener, I want to be transported to where that inspiration came from. And this album from the get-go did that for me. It was an album that transported me. If music doesn't transport me, it's really hard for me to connect with it.
That's cool, man. I always wonder what it is that actually does that, and what it is when people really connect with something like that, and trying to sort of like create something authentic enough that people can do that is always a challenge, because you can't try too hard to do it, because then it's not authentic. So it's like you do have to just kind of like let that stuff unabashedly flow. You can't make stuff in hopes that people are going to like it. That's impossible. So you just kind of have to do what you like. So it's nice to hear that it connected with you.
Where do you look for inspiration? Do you look at other bands, music, art, your surroundings, your backyard?
A little bit of all of it, I suppose. I'm sort of just like a sponge, and one of those people that like are constantly just absorbing everything. The environment was very different for this record in terms of like the actual landscape. We had moved out to the desert where I still currently live, and I think this is a place that deeply informed my psychological headspace and sort of a transformative moment during the pandemic as well. And I think it sort of gave me a new dimension and evolution to myself that I think was expressed in this album as we were all out here and experiencing it. And I think that, there's aspects of, like a song like Drift, to me, I hear it and I like am taken and transported into the desert where I felt that song. I think of things like Alien, where you're sitting under the night sky and Joshua Tree, and you look up and you really feel like you're on a glass marble hurling through space, because you can see every star in the night sky and planets with your eye in the Milky Way, and you sort of let the imagination wander, and you sort of think about aliens and stuff that seems to be a hot button topic right now, but how to give it its own sort of fun, crazy sci-fi intense lore, and connect it to some strange esoteric philosophies, because I'm always a big fan of things like that, the more esoteric aspects of history, the occult, strange sort of conspiracy theories I find wildly entertaining. So, it's a little bit of everything. To me, I am fascinated deeply by the question marks of life, or things that we can't necessarily answer, things that still capture the human imagination, things that with all our infinite wisdom, the greatest thinkers still scratch their head over and go, I don't know. So to me, I like that stuff.
Man, that's really cool. And I'm glad you didn't mention any flat earth in the process, because you would have lost me at that point.
No, and even the conspiracy theory thing, like I'm very practical about. Like obviously, I look at it as a source of entertainment. I do think I have a thought about conspiracy theories that, like, I think like 98% of conspiracy theory is just like fat bullshit encased over like maybe a 2% truth of something that's in there. But it's all just covered in all this ridiculous fat as a way to sort of like, make it just completely absurd and unbelievable, and discredit maybe that 2% truth in there. So, I don't hold any delusions about that stuff, but I do find it fascinating that for me, the human imagination is something that I've constantly, you know, been in love with and passionate about. And I think that, you know, creativity and imagination can stem largely from paranoia. And I think that I'm fascinated by the relationship between paranoia and creativity, because, you know, people will come up with the wildest stuff. And I'm like, you know, people that otherwise might not think they're even creative. You know what I mean? But you're like, clearly everyone is wildly creative. It's just what they're, you know, sort of is that spark for them. And sometimes it might be, you know, a more, you know, pure form of just complete insanity, which is interesting to me nonetheless.
You know, we have similar thought processes. Before I ask you about it, my last question, my son is always asking me why I watch this show about a treasure in Oak Island. For 7 seasons, they've been digging, looking for a treasure, using modern technology, not finding anything for a treasure that apparently was put there by guys in like the 1400s. And my son is like, if they can't find it with modern technology now, what makes them believe that people in the 1400s were able to hide it? I always tell them, I'm not watching it because I think they're going to find it. I'm watching because of the thought process that these people have. I find that intriguing. It's like studying humanity. Like, so when I watch that, I'm studying other humans in terms of how they think, and that's what's appealing to me. It's not the treasure. I know there's nothing there.
Yeah.
So,
No, and again, I'm the same way, where it's almost like the you know, I can see where, you know, watching people sort of like hope and wishful thinking and sort of, you know, the things that make them tick and the desire to keep doing it is more interesting than maybe the actual destination or something like that, you know.
last question for you. The album comes out tomorrow. I mean, we're recording this today. The album comes out tomorrow, September 22nd on Century Media. What plans do you guys have? Are you guys going to hit the road promoting this album? Are you guys coming to Toronto? Am I going to see your beautiful faces on stage here?
It's hard. We actually don't have any touring planned for 2024. We have a huge end of the year show that we're doing in Los Angeles on the 29th of December, literally like a New Year's type show. And we have a ton of cool stuff planned for that, where it's a little bit of a dry run on testing out this production and things that we want to try. And then from there, we'll figure out what the logistics of moving this stuff around looks like, and hopefully get some touring on the books for next year. But it's sort of, it's tough for me to commit to that answer right now. But needless to say, we're excited to get this album out and play one big, huge show this year. And you know, hopefully we'll be able to cross paths with everyone next year.
Well, you're going to have people salivating once this album comes out to see you guys on the road playing these songs. Thank you very much, man. Lex, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you,
pleasure
man,
talking to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for doing what you do and actually talking about music on sort of just deeper than a surface level. I think that's important.
That's to be honest with you, that's what I'm all about. I'm really not about beefs or what people are wearing or where you go get your hair cut. To me, that's all irrelevant. I care about the art and the artist. So thank you for taking the time.
Hell yeah, brother. You're the last of a dying breed out there. So kudos.
Hey, I'll carry that flag. Maybe I'll have one day my own show, not digging for a treasure in an island, but carrying that flag all the way to the moon or Mars or whatever the fuck we'll go.
Hell yeah, brother. You take care.
Take care, man. All the best. See ya.